And this is being revised in the Senate. And Chis Escudero is the one handling this. Okay. So, parang gusto ko lang sabihin na this juxtaposition of this Losada expose vis-a-vis this big, to me, important legislative pieces, yan yung nangyayari sa atin sa ngayon. In a kind of, in a literal and figurative way, no? Pag napasa kasi yung anti-vagrancy advocacy na, yan na yung pag-define ng what to do with poor people and supposed prostituted women, and etc. Yun ang babagay siya. Okay. So sabi natin, what is feminism today? I've sent a copy of this report which I finished along with others, I'd like to mention and see, together in collaboration with the IPD. And I thought I'd take bits and pieces of that study because I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was released October 27, not too long ago. In fact, hindi pa nakapublish. And I thought this will be an interesting piece to just share with you. It's called, and it's also very strengthening women's participation in politics and governance, bringing back politics into the Philippine women's engagement. Haba, ano? Tapos, meron pang parenthesis, reflection and insights on the status and directions of women's political participation, reimagining the women's movement. Now, hindi ko kasalanan lahat ng habang titulo, pero this is a collaborative work. Anyway, what is interesting about this is some of the questions, directly or indirectly, ni Delia. We interviewed 76 women, hindi lahat organized, but many organized women, from all generations. May mainstream political women, we have Bangsamoro women. Bangsamoro women are MNLF women, or ex-MNLF. They're differentiated from your categorical Muslim. Malinaw sila doon. So when we speak to them, sabi, kami Bangsamoro, hindi na kami Muslim. So I think that kind of parang specificity very important in telling you what has happened to that study. Okay, ito yung isang interesting comment na about young people. Ito yung sabi ng study namin. So, we interviewed 76 participants across the country, not everybody, but with indigenous women, Bangsamoro women, Muslim women, mainstream women from Abara, Bangged, as far as that. Sabi nito, many of the conversation, we call it conversation, again, the postmodern, the meta narrative, the conversation participants. Basically, this was a research. Acknowledge that younger women and youth in general have not been touched by many of the issues that organized groups and the social movements of the 70s and 60s have been articulating and protesting against, even dying for in some instances. Perhaps, the participants said, and this is me speaking as the main author of this, the younger generation has their own ways of reckoning with the socio-political issues. One of the women said, let's not give up on them. There is a need to connect, many insisted, to those we have not yet reached. Pero when we ask, whom have we not reached? Hindi rin namin masyado alam. So it speaks of also a kind of a self-critiquing, no? And sabi ng isa, because younger women may be trying to find their own niche, their struggles are being framed differently from their foremothers, taking on shapes and directions that are contextualized in their own milieu. The problem is, ano yung milieu na yun? As Delia said, it's been what? We founded Kalayan. Kalayan is a feminist organization, the first one to come out, publicly declaring in the context of the National Democratic Movement na feminista kami at gusto namin may kilusang pagpapalaya. Hindi lang, but the other thing I'd like to say is we used to call the women's movement now Women's Liberation Movement. And we fast pagka nawawala yung liberation. Pero after several points, syempre Lou and I and the rest of Kalayaan gave up kasi para kami mga bakit nawawala liberation? Wala na eh. Okay. Tapos sabi ng isang babae, sabi niya, woman leader, community leader ko, sabi niya, may articulation talaga ng struggle fatigue ang tawag niya, or my term. A woman leader said, maganda siguro sa Tagalog, no? In English ko na pala. Okay. When you have so little energy left, as a result of the long years of struggle, and she's talking of being activist of the 70s and 80s, when your domestic situation changes over time, and in my case, I have children to take care of, when you need to begin to worry about your financial needs, because she had been a full-time meaning aktivista ka, wala kang ginagawa kundi maging kadre. Okay? When you need to worry about your financial needs, and then have to continue your activism, being in social movements that keep fighting with each other was simply a bit too much. In light of the many things that needed my attention, as a woman, as a mother, wife, organizer, activist, etc. The movement then was my safe haven. Comrades were my best friends. Now you don't know who really are your friends and your enemies. Before, to me, the enemy was clear, the anti-people institutions and policies. And then I go on, and we go on, and as a collective, we asserted in the study that since in the split in the 1990s, alam naman nyo na nag-split ang kaliwa dito, pero Ateneo kayo baka hindi mo siya alam. The National Democratic, yung sabi nyo, yung komunista, no? But not all of them communist, I assure you. Yung mga dyan, di sosyalista. Okay. There had been a rethinking on many issues about and within the social movements. One issue is the impact of fragmentations that has obviously weakened not only the various sections of the left, but also the women's movements. The women's movement, and this is very interesting, kasi later, it's a 100+ page report, single space, times Roman 12. Movements na ang tawag nila. Nobody calls it anymore. Women's liberation movement at saka movements na. Sabi ng isang respondent namin, the women's movement failed to consolidate a constituency because of its sporadic and sparse organizing, and it has a low capacity to permeate the discourses of the wider social movements, in effect, resulting in the marginalization of the women's agenda. So, very self-critical yung mga babae. Parang may self-blaming yung tone ng the entire conversation, discussion natin, no? Tapos, many of the respondents, and I believe siguro mga of the 76, 2/3 none or more, agreed that the one solid, one center, nearly monolithic women's movement has now become the women's movements. Yes. Sabi ng isang participant, women dispersed across different formations. So, yan yung sasabi ni Delia kanina, fisher folk, ganyan, labor, sectors and blocks, political blocks. Kasi dati nung unang panahon, wala naman kaming party list group. Ang alam lang namin partido, yung partido namin at yung partido ng nasyonalista at liberal. So bago sa amin itong mga party list groups, no? So she was referring to this, yung political blocks. Making it difficult to locate and distinguish a discrete formation that may be considered as the women's movement or movements. In fact, one key insight looks at how women have been mobilized into sectors and blocks, and I think this echoes what, yung utilitarian viewing of women, no? Have been mobilized into sector and blocks, underscoring the absence of a deliberate and sustained organizing effort that uses women identity or feminism, if you will, as a frame. Instead, women in movements today are being organized as peasants, fisher folk, urban poor worker, and so on. Organizing within the left, and I speak from experience, not just from the research, has traditionally been and continues to be along sectoral groups. So Delia, if I don't know if it will hearten you or, still labor, workers, peasants, indigenous, Moro women, Bangsamoro, church people, religious, to mention the most significant sectors. May mga subgroupings na ngayon. The women's movement in its early years, and I'm talking of the 70s, 60s, 60s, 70s, then early 80s, was also organized along sectoral formations and often within the influence of labor formations. Ganun pa rin yun. Except for dear old Kalayaan, which insisted on its parang autonomy, and now, syempre nakain na kami ng sistema yun. Kasi after a while, you look fully shouting, women's liberation movement. Kasi wala nakikinig. Okay. We also asserted in the study that, yun. So maganda rin yung sinabi ni Delia na yung identity politics, because in fact, it's very strong now.